man.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, what up?
Look at the Sun Studios T-shirt. I wonder where you got that great piece of merch.
At Memphis, Tennessee, at Graceland.
Graceland, that sure looks.
That was a good time, man. That was a good time. I had a really good time going to Memphis and hanging out with you.
You didn't get that at Graceland. You got that at Sun Studios.
No, I got it at Sun Studios. Yeah.
Yeah.
I say Graceland? Yeah. Sorry. I got it at Sun Studios. And when we were there, I saw a picture of the Stray Cats on the wall of Sun Studios, took a picture of it, and texted over to Slim Jim, the drummer. And I go, "Did you know you're on the wall?" He's like, "Hell yes, I know I'm on the wall there."
Yeah, cool stuff. Let me see if I'm on my screen here. I need to be able to see the chat. So let me make a little edit real quick. All right. Yeah, so thanks for jumping in, man. So, it wouldn't be rock and roll without a couple of technical difficulties, right?
Oh, I had the YouTube one open on a different tab, and I was hearing myself. I'm like, "What the hell is going on?" But it looks like it's going good.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, it's not near as fucked up as the DeSantis thing yesterday, huh?
Oh, yeah. Well, did they do that?
I didn't watch. I just heard about it.
Yeah.
Anyhow, we're like talking about 80s, not politics.
That's right.
That's for another time. I've been listening to the 80s like all evening now. Yeah, I don't know if you like checked out my Twitter. I was like, man, I got into like some deep cuts and stuff, and it just is such a flashback, and it like makes me happy and it makes me sad at the same time. It's really weird. Music is like an amazing thing. It really is.
So do you feel? Does it make you feel older when you listen to it, or does it make you feel young?
No, it definitely makes me feel older. It makes me like it makes me miss those days because those days were just so like not kind of carefree. Kind of. I was just like living my life, man. I was just living my life. You're talking about 80s, like I graduated in 81. So my senior year, like half of it was 1980. So like, the late 70s and 80s, early 80s is like my high school. And then like right after that, you're 18 and I was like sneaking into clubs and all of the crazy shit back then. It was such a good time, man. There was like that besides like it's funny because like music bleeds into so many more different areas of life than just music. Like if you look at like the 60s and like, just all of that, all the 60s type of music, the fashion went hand in hand with it. And look at the 80s, man. There's like, you mentioned 80s and people like you immediately think of like some, neon colors and parachute pants and like all that madness stuff. It was like, but it was fun time. And music was crazy. There was like there's such an a vast array of different types of music. It wasn't just like rock and roll. You know what I mean? It's like Van Halen like hit in like 1977. So by like 1980, they're like were like hit their stride by like 1980. But you had this.
Well, that was Diver Down, right? Was that like 81? Diver Down?
Diver Down. I thought it was 80. They had an album called 1984.
Well, that was the last album
with David Lee Roth. Yeah, so I think Diver Down was like a little bit before that, but I think it's like it was early 80s. I won't even get into that anyhow. But you had like stuff like the Stray Cats. You had like the Specials. You had like all these different like types of bands. It wasn't just rock and roll. It just wasn't like new. Yet the punk rock was like really, really hit like in the mid to late 70s. And what spurned off of punk rock was, it's so funny because like people now, it's all like blurred and they forget. But like new wave and punk rock was like they were like hand in hand. New wave was just like radio friendly punk rock basically. And we were talking on the phone and you brought up like Suicidal and the West Coast punk. And I was a concert promoter and I did so many of those bands. Even like before Big Brother, I did a show with Fear, The Germs, Suicidal. There's Marky Ramone. I think it was Marky Ramone played like Ramone songs. And there's a couple other bands, but it was like, that was all like, punk, but West Coast punk. I wasn't into West Coast punk when that was happening at that time. It was super, super violent. Like those, they didn't even call them like a mosh pit. It wasn't called the mosh pit back then. It was called the Fear Circle. And like, if you went into the Fear Circle, you were getting fucked up. I was more into like East Coast punk and like UK. Like I like the Sex Pistols. Love the Clash. Was super, super into the Ramones. I don't even know how many times I saw the Ramones. I saw them everywhere from Hofstra University on Long Island, New York, to CBGB's, to out in LA at the Palace. And I think the last time I saw any of them was Joey Ramone at the Viper Room before he died. So, but I was like really into that, and I was really into new wave. Let me tell you, there was a difference between the punk rock chicks and the new wave chicks. The punk rock chicks, I had no desire to fuck any of them. The new wave chicks were hot, good looking, and I was out to get laid. Like I liked that shit. That was fun.
So we're gonna lead into that because, and I see some of the chat. Sorry, we had a few glitches getting started. So I see Bob Fred said, "Hello, Evil Dick. It's Katie from Michigan, Kady." And then Laura Johnson, excited. So let me ask my producer to check, make sure that we're getting through with the chat, because
where is the chat? I didn't even see it. I just went over to. Oh fuck! Now I can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
I'm just trying to find the chat. I couldn't find it.
Yeah. Okay. There it is. Alex Dothright. Hey guys, born in 2000, but the 80s is the best decade for movies for sure. Alex, we're going to talk about that. The 80s was the best decade, period. Period. And we're going to get into that. So, Dick, you and I had two different experiences, and we're gonna lead into, without saying exactly how old we are, but I was a
hey man,
I was a
I'm
kid.
not shy about it. Listen, I'm gonna be 60 next month, man.
So okay, so we're gonna come up with two different experiences. One, based on the fact that I was born in 73, so I started the decade as a young kid just starting school, and I ended the decade with my first car driving. You started the decade, you graduated high school in 81?
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about, and hello, Laura. Excited to hear just a good conversation. Oh, you're going to hear it tonight. No filters. A little bit different than my normal content that we talk about on the channel. But we're going to lead into why I created the channel, and it has a lot to do with what we're going to talk about tonight with the 80s. So the decade starts, and we're going to talk about a few things that kicked off the decade that were big moments: music, movies, and events, world events. So
but before that, remember to subscribe. Hit that button right there, boys and girls.
That's right. That's right. That's the YouTube game, everybody. You gotta subscribe.
I'm not on YouTube, but I get it.
Yeah, and if you don't hit the like button and leave a comment, then YouTube tends to shuffle us down the deck. So we really appreciate that. So the decade starts, and what do you remember? You're a junior in high school. What stuck out to you in your memory about being on the West Coast, a kid that was born in New York but raised in California? Talk to us about junior in high school, 1980.
I grew up in a weird area, man. I didn't grow up I grew up surfing and stuff, but I think we were talking. Wasn't it you I was talking to about this? I was talking to you about this, right?
Yeah,
I was talking to somebody. Anyhow, I grew up in North Long Beach, which is like my high school was like next to the freeway, and on the other side of the freeway was Compton. So it wasn't like, even though I did a lot of my growing up at the beach, like surfing at Seal Beach and surfing at Huntington Beach, and then when I got my car, and didn't have to take the fucking bus anymore. I'm driving down to Newport Beach. It's weird because you hear about like, oh, the waves are better down here, and like, so I was able to travel farther when you get a car. But we were, dude, I was like in 5th or 6th grade, like learning to surf, getting up at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, riding my bike like 3 miles over to my friend's house. And those boards back then were like huge. It's like a 7-foot board. I'm on a 10-speed. There was one day that somebody opened their door and I ran into their door and my fucking board spinning in the middle of the street. And I'm like laid out. Oh, sorry. I was all embarrassed to collect my stuff, get back on my 10-speed. And I'm like, but I go over to my friend's house. I would leave my bike at his house and we would catch the bus because it was like real close to where the bus was to his house. We'd catch the bus and it would take like an hour and a half, somewhere in there to get to the beach. And then we would like surf all day long and we would come home. And I always tell the story. It's so ridiculous. It's child abuse, man. Like our parents, our parents would give us 50 cents, a quarter there and a quarter home. If you want to eat, come home earlier. That's what we would get told. Come home earlier and make yourself a sandwich. And half the time there wasn't shit to make to bring. So anyhow, I got real good aim with the Frisbee. Like, those summers, I could hit somebody's blanket from like 100 yards away. And my buddy Mike, he'd be like running and he'd have this like fantastical, diving catches right into their stuff. And he would come out with a sandwich or $1 or something. And that's how we ate every day.
Yeah. Thanks, King. So we had the Kings on the chat. I really appreciate that. We had a little what we call a StreamYard technical glitch. Normally, for those that saw that we were delayed a few minutes, normally I build the streams through just through StreamYard. For this one, I did it through the YouTube studio, and a little bit of a glitch. So hopefully we'll get that worked out. But I appreciate seeing Kings in here. Yeah. So, Dick, you talk about like how different it was, in the 80s, especially the early 80s, because I think we'll lead into, how we get to the end of the decade. But at the beginning of the decade, I was a little kid, just starting school, and even as a second grader, I was begging to get a bike because a bicycle meant freedom. You went outside, you were out all day. The metaphor that a lot of people have probably heard in the 90s and 2000s about you came home when the street lights came on. That was true.
Totally. Latchkey kids. I was a latchkey kid.
Absolutely.
You're out all day. Your parents were gone. My dad was gone to work. He worked like my dad worked like selling mattresses, like at like it's called W. Simmons was like where he worked the longest, but it's kind of like an Ortho or any of these mattress places that you see like anywhere. And but it's long hours, man. He would go in there. I think the place would open up at like 10 and wouldn't close until like 9. And he was like the only dude, one dude running the whole store by himself. And he busted his ass, but he was gone all the time. And then, my mom, she was like at church all the time. So we were on our own, man. It just is what it is.
Well, we were coming out of the 70s where, you had a recession, you had you remember all the muscle cars of the 60s and early 70s. And then all of a sudden they were filling up used car lots because nobody could afford the gas. And then,
dude, it was that fake gas crisis of the 70s. Like people don't remember that shit either. It's like there was like you had to line up to get gasoline for like a mile. Like no bullshit. Like fucking. Can I say fucking on YouTube?
You say whatever you want, man.
Okay.
They pull
it's
us down.
like a mile long. And like I remember, like somebody like cut in front of my dad, and like you're waiting for, and like he's like this little Italian dude, and he's like, I think we were in New York at the time. It must have been summertime. We were on vacation or something. And the guy gets out, and he's like, it's like this. It's like a road rage, except for in line, right? And I don't remember exactly what the situation. I was just a little kid back then. And I just remember, like, it's funny the stuff you remember. Here I am, like 60 years old, and I remember this from when I'm like, I don't know, must have been like 10.
Well, and you know what that led us to? That led us to 1980 and very early in the year, I think it was February, I have vivid memories of the call on the TV. My dad, who knew, we grew up in the South. I was from Tennessee. There was no hockey. There's the Nashville Predators now. There's the Florida Panthers. There's hockey in the South now, but there was no hockey in the South in 1980.
No way.
And the U.S. Olympic team played the Russians, and it was the biggest thing you've ever seen. And I remember my dad, who knew nothing about hockey, didn't care about hockey, and he jumps out of the chair. And I just remember, I think it was Al Michaels, but, do you believe in miracles? And the Americans beat the Russians, and that kicked off.
It was the whole Cold War. It was the whole Cold War thing.
Absolutely.
The whole Cold War. And back then, there weren't professionals allowed to play in the Olympics. It was for amateurs.
Yeah.
So no NHL players or any hockey players from around the world in professional leagues were allowed to play. But in Russia, of course, they lied, and their professionals were that was their professionals in the Olympics. So our amateurs were playing their professionals, and it was like the odds were like 1,000 to 1 or something of us even getting to the finals, and nobody gave the Americans a chance in hell in beating the Russians in the final. And you remember, they pulled it off.
It wasn't the final; it was the semis.
Oh, I don't even remember that.
Yeah, so that's an important thing
because it was such a big deal.
Yeah, so I remember my mom after the game said something to the effect, and I don't remember this part. She told me years later that she said, "Well, they've still got one more game to go to win the gold." And my dad said, "Who gives a shit? They beat the Russians." He didn't care. And that started the 80s. It was all between the Iran hostage stuff, whatever your thought about that politically, and then, but then when the Americans beat the Russians, and of course, then we get to May, and the movie that is still, I'm not saying it's the best movie of all time, but it is my favorite movie of all time, comes out, and it's The Empire Strikes Back.
I thought you were going to either say Back to the Future or Rocky 3 against the Russian.
We haven't gotten to Back to the Future yet. We haven't gotten to Back to the Future, which we're gonna come back to that, because there's a documentary out on Michael J. Fox, and I'm going to talk about that because that's an underrated figure in our childhood. People that grew up in the 80s, Michael J. Fox is, I don't know that he's given enough credit for being as influential as he was with our youth and growing up. But so we have the Americans beating the Russians in hockey. We have Empire Strikes Back coming out, which, other than The Godfather 2, you didn't have movies that ended with the bad guys winning or a cliffhanger.
I shit you not. When Empire gets 1977, let me figure out, I was 14 years old. So it took 3 more years for them to, come out with Empire Strikes Back. So you're talking 1980. So I was probably either a junior or senior in high school. And I remember the first 3 trilogy I went and saw with my dad. And again, that was one of, it wasn't the first big blockbuster. The Exorcist came before and had the huge lines and stuff, but it was one of the first huge blockbusters where you had lines around the building and all down Hollywood Boulevard, to the Chinese Theater and all that stuff. So when Empire Strikes Back, I remember sitting in the theater and it came to an end, and it was people are clapping, and it got all quiet, and I was like, I have to wait 3 years until that, loud, and everybody just started busting up. But that's
Absolutely.
How I felt. 3 years. Yeah. 3 years when you're 16, 17 years old is a fucking eternity, man. I had to wait 3. Han Solo's still in carbonite, man. I gotta wait 3 years. What is this part?
And I want to cover a few of these chats. So we're going to come back to that. Daisy Blossom, she says you had. I'm assuming Daisy Blossom's female, but whatever. You had to know if your license plate was even or odd to get gas.
My first job was at a gas station. I was in high school. I think it was like 15. And I couldn't give people gas. It was like the odd numbers went with Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and the even numbers went with Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. There was no gas on Sunday.
Yeah, and then Alex says 1980 was also the year of The Shining, best horror movie ever. So, Alex, there were two movies that, as a kid, well, The Exorcist. They didn't let me watch The Exorcist till I was a little bit older, so I didn't see The Exorcist at the beginning of the 80s. But the two that stood out to me that scared the hell out of me was The Shining and Salem's Lot. Salem's Lot, specifically because one of the kids died, and the other kid is in his bedroom on the second floor of the house, and the kid is floating, knocking on his window. Let me in, let me in. Scared the shit out of me. And then The Shining, do I have to even pick 10 scenes in that movie? They all scared me.
Oh, The Shining was like, The Shining's still fantastic.
It's a and as I got older, I really came to appreciate the greatness of that movie, of The Shining. Just, from beginning to end, it's a masterpiece.
Jack Nicholson, Scatman Crothers was great in it too, though.
And scary. He was creepy, right?
Yeah, Jack Nicholson. You could just see like the turn in him, and that movie was movie was a bit weird for even then it was like high school age. But still, that scene where he opens the one hotel room door and there's like a pig going down on somebody. It's like, what the fuck? And then that naked woman who's making out with a hot girl and she turns into like the naked old woman that's all like fucked up. And you're just like, I was scarred for life, man.
Yeah. So,
Poltergeist was another one that was like 80s. That was like scary as hell.
Loved Poltergeist. So, also in 1980, we had, switching to music a little bit, we had an album come out. Oh, there were so many albums, but one that stuck out to me that literally, I don't think a month or a year went by for 20 something years. And still to this day, you hear it all over the radio, was AC/DC's Back in Black. That album, you thought the band that, their lead singer had died, and they find a guy who sounds different, but also similar enough. And then they make one of the greatest rock albums of all time in 1980 that, how many bands have tried to emulate the guitar sound, the riff, the style? I mean, and that came out in 1980, which is hard to believe, but 1980 it felt like something was changing. You saw that we had exited the 70s and fashion was starting to change. The malls, what was it like, before I get into what it was like for me in Memphis, what was it like for you in California with like the malls and the fashion? I mean, did you feel like LA was so far ahead of everywhere else? That's all you knew?
Well,
really,
but it
right?
was in different ways. Cause like I went back and forth to New York too. I think when I was like 19, I moved back to New York and stayed with my grandmother. I got a job working at Macy's in New York City, working in I think it was called the Action Shops. I don't know how I remember this shit, but it was like young men's clothes. And so like I knew when everything was going on sale, and then I got my discount on top of it, on top of the sale. So I would like bring in the clothes that fit me that were going on sale and hide it in the back, and then I would buy it on sale. So I was like dressing pretty sharp back then. That was like, but it just was very, very different. It was like, I don't know. The music in California, you have this impression that music's music. Music goes everywhere, but it's different. It's like different areas, like, how huge the Go-Go's were, and like Adam Ant and like all of that, like West Coast. East Coast was like, I don't know, you go to clubs you'd even going to clubs.
Now you saw the Go-Go's before they became kind of the finished version of what they became when they had hit.
I was at the Whiskey. I saw the Go-Go's at the Whiskey when Belinda Carlisle was like fat and had a flat top. Everybody remembers Belinda Carlisle, this smoking hot, right?
Well, they were like when you saw them, they were like a punk band, right?
They were punk. This is what I was saying earlier. Like punk and new wave, they like totally went hand in hand. It was just it was radio friendly punk rock is all new wave was.
Listen, I won't even apologize. I still love the Go-Go's.
Dude, the Go-Go's are great. I was like listening to like all that 80s stuff, and I put on Our Lips Are Sealed, Vacation. It's like it was fun. It was fun music, man.
It was, yeah. So you had, it in the beginning of the 80s, you also had what you talked about, the new wave music. They were trying to, we'll see at the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, they do the same thing with another genre. They want to label everything. So they created what was called new wave, and which was really not fair to the bands. And Donna, I couldn't own that album either, AC/DC, when I was 7, 8 years old. There was a kid across the street who was 3 years older than me, and his parents gave him everything. So that's where I heard the music. So I'm right there with you, Donna. But the new wave was a way for them to categorize bands that didn't necessarily fit. And one of them, where the singer died, and they there
was a lot of them where the singer
was Joy Division. I think was his name Ian Curtis, but Joy Division's singer died, and the remaining members formed New Order. Joy Division was a seminal band that influenced U2 and so many other bands, Crowded House and all these bands that came out of England and even some of the bands in the States. And so you started hearing the synthesizers added to guitar riffs, and
very, very 80s. Dude, even when Eddie Van Halen started doing synthesizers over his guitar, you're like dead center in the 80s. Jump, Van Halen Jump, that starts out with synthesizers. He put his guitar down, and like everybody was using synthesizers then. What I was saying with the punk rock and the new wave, I can't even tell you. It's so funny because they played on the same bill like so many times. I must have seen the Ramones and the B-52s play together at least 5 times, because it was just like that. And like everybody knew each other in those circles, Iggy Pop and Ramones and Blondie. Everybody remembers Blondie, like more new wave, but she was like punk rock, man, playing in CBGBs with all the rest of the hardcore punk rock. And what it is like you have to look at society and where society is. You mentioned like coming out of a recession, almost a depression, like in the 70s, where the gas lines and all of this shit, and the hardcore punk, where like the angry punk rock, that's where all that was born from, because none of these kids could get jobs, and their father's working in a factory for like 12 hours a day, blah, 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 blah. And here comes the 80s where we're coming out of that. And everybody's like, there's plenty of jobs. You could get a job at the fucking mall working at Perry's Pizza, just like in what the hell movie was that?
And that was where I lived.
Oh, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. They worked at Perry's Pizza. So that was a big thing on the West Coast.
So we're going to talk about that. We're going to lead into the malls, but we got to talk about probably the biggest pop culture that happened in my life. Influence, not Facebook, not the internet, although you'd have to say the internet has had more of a lasting, will have a lasting impact on all of our lives. But MTV, today, I don't know if you saw it, but I tweeted, and Martha Quinn, liked my tweet. And you got to be a certain age to know who Martha Quinn is. But like MTV, like it changed everything, didn't it, Dick? It was Facebook and TikTok and MySpace and
that was the beginning.
Instagram. It was all of it combined. It's where we got everything, right?
And like my friends, where I lived, we didn't get cable TV until like later. My girlfriend, who lived in Huntington Beach, her family, her dad was a cable installer, so they had cable like early on. So I'm like watching MTV like over at their house. Like we didn't have cable TV at our house. Like no way. but it changed everything in a big way, because like I said, with the music goes along with fashion, and that's when all the kids want to emulate what they're seeing now on MTV. Where before, what did you have? You had Don Kirshner's rock concert on at like 12 p.m. or 12 a.m. on Friday nights. After all of the talk shows went off the air, for an hour, they would you'd see bands perform and shit like that. So
now you were in high school, so I can't imagine MTV for you. I was still at the point where, coming off Empire Strikes Back, every store you walked into, I was getting Star Wars toys, right? I was right in the wheelhouse of that generation of kids I was still very young, and I wanted every action figure, every toy. I'm staring at one right now that is from the 1978 Kenner line that's worth I don't know how much, but you were in high school, so you didn't, all that stuff, you passed all that. You just went and saw the movies, and that was it, right?
Yeah, I didn't know. Well, you got to remember too, like I said, like my parents weren't buying me shit. So even I remember I wore Tough Skins. Do you remember those? Did you have to wear those?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wore Tough Skins. Like, my mother refused to buy me anything but Tough Skins. And if I wanted to wear something else, you go buy it. So that's why I told you I got a job. I was 15 years old working at the gas station, because here I am going from even going into junior high school, man. You're getting teased relentlessly. Oh, you're wearing Tough Skins, you're being made fun of when everybody's wearing Levi's and stuff like that. So I think that come around high school, it was weird because as a kid, I think I knew going into high school, I had braces from the time I was in 4th grade until 9th grade. And they said it would be 2.5 years. And it was 5 years. And then they told me that it was going to be even longer unless I had all my baby teeth pulled. I had 8 molars, two on top, 2 on bottom, each side. And they were afraid that if they didn't come out, that my teeth would be crooked and da-da-da-da. And I had them on for 5 years. I'm like, I am not having braces on in high school. That was it. I drew the line. I'm like, pull the teeth out. How old are you then? 13 or 14 years old. And I'm like, pull 8 teeth. I don't care. Just pull them. And I got 8 teeth pulled. I wasn't going into high school with braces, and I wasn't going into high school wearing Tough Skins. That was the end of that bullshit.
So before we jump into some of the clothing stuff, 1981, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, dude, that movie was it was huge, and it was so much fun. How that movie just I haven't seen it in so long. I should go back and watch it. But if I remember correctly, it starts off right in the middle of a chase scene or something, or
it starts out like that. He's in a temple, and the large stone is chasing him.
Yeah, that was the very beginning. That was the opening. The opening to the second one was through
the second
Asian country
he was in the nightclub.
Shot, or what was his name then? The guy that just won an Academy Award.
Short Round.
And that movie was fantastic. But the way they started was just boom, you're right in the middle of it, and you just go. There was no big long setup. This is the problem with a lot of movies now, man. It's you got fucking an hour of setup and all of this bullshit, and just get on with it already. It's either that, or it's all filmed on a green screen and has literally no real script to it. So it's just nothing but fighting.
For us as kids, Star Wars and the movies, it was an ensemble. It was this big, larger than life thing. Raiders was the movie to me that made Harrison Ford the star, the person that okay, we're going to see everything he's in. It as a kid growing up, that was okay, this was the guy that played Han Solo.
Which was weird too, because as I was a kid, I went to go see everything that Mark Hamill was in. I saw Corvette Summer twice.
See, I didn't until later.
And it's you look back and you always expected Mark Hamill to be the big star that came out of that, and it was Harrison Ford that became the mega star. It's still to this day, he's still putting out Indiana Jones. This guy's like 900 years old and he's still putting out an Indiana Jones. Yeah, I broke 2 hips on the set, but we put some pins in it and I'm back to work a month later.
43 years later. Michael Blancato says, "Hey, Evil Dick." San Diego Girl says, "All I wanted were Gloria Vanderbilt jeans." You weren't the only one.
Oh, wait a minute. What about Ditto jeans? Are those more 70s Ditto? This is before your time, Sean. Do they have Dittos in Nashville? Dittos made like this girl's asses like perfect.
They had, so the first ones that obviously Gloria Vanderbilt, I had an older sister, so I remember that San Diego Girl.
Angel flight pants for the guys.
Hey, Matt Dwayne.
Angel flight pants.
What I remember, as far as like the girls, is Jordache. Jordache was the big jeans for the girls that when I was growing up as a kid. But so what about parachute pants, Dick?
Did you wear a pair? I had a pair. Where I got them? I got them at Judy's. Do you remember Judy's in the mall?
We didn't have a Judy's at my mall. I don't think.
Dude, I thought every mall had a Judy's.
We had
in the very back, at least in my mall, there was like this little tiny section that had like men's clothes, and they had some cool men's stuff. And there was a smoking hot girl that I was like trying to date. So I'd always find an excuse to go into Judy's, and then like you feel really awkward. So I'd end up buying something. So at least I wasn't really here to just hit on you. I was really here to buy something, but I really wasn't.
So we had a store where the great looking girls worked. And, if you watch the series Stranger Things, one of the things that Stranger Things in the first season really got right was you got on your BMX bike or knockoff brand, whatever your parents bought you. And there was always that one kid that had the BMX bike that was like $500. And he bragged about how your bike was like $60. So we'd ride our bikes up to the mall, and there was a store called Merry Go Round. And
I remember that store.
I think it was a chain. So for everybody in the chat, if you guys remember a store called Merry Go Round.
Well, obviously it was a chain. You lived in Memphis. I lived in LA. If I remember Merry Go Round, it had to be a chain, motherfucker.
Yeah. So in Samuel Gutierrez, we're going to talk about Ocean Pacific in just a second.
Oh, dude. Yeah. I got a story
Merry Go
about
Round
shirts.
We would ride our bikes just like Stranger Things and just like the Goonies. Our crew of guys, and we'd ride our bikes up to the mall, and we'd toss our bikes behind this bush near a store called Woolworths. And you didn't chain your bikes up. Nobody took your bikes. You threw them behind the bush.
Maybe where you lived.
Yeah. You're like
where I live.
Not where you lived.
Not where I live.
But so we would go in, and there was like a little stand, or what do you call it? The parlor where the guy would make the ice cream floats and all that. And one day out of maybe 3, he would give us root beer floats or whatever for free, wouldn't charge us. And so it was like a soda fountain within this store. We would hit that first, and then
we would in merry-go-round.
No, this was in a place called Woolworths.
Okay, Woolworths.
It was like a Walgreens type place. Yeah, so we went
Thrifty too, Thrifties.
Yeah, that's where we would go into the mall, and because it was like the entrance to that place was right where we would come off the street where we'd ride our bikes, and so we'd walk in the mall, and there was a place called Camelot Music. So we'd hit the music store first, and there was always one guy. Everybody in the store had long hair that worked there, and there was one guy that was in the music store, and everybody knew someone like this. So if you're in the chat, you have to remember that. There was always that one guy that had told everybody in the store, "I'm moving in a month. I'm going to New York or LA." And like he either had a band or he was going to be an actor. And there was some story about how he was leaving the town and he was moving out west, or he's moving up north. And, and so there was that guy. We had that guy. So we would go in the store. We'd see the latest, what was going on in the music scene. The hair bands were starting to take off. So we started to see the rock bands. Obviously we all knew Van Halen. I got my first Def Leppard album there. And then we would leave the store, and there was Merry Go Round about 3 stores down. And we were young, right? We weren't as old as Evil Dick here. So we were punk 10, 11-year-old kids. So we would walk by the merry-go-round, and the girls were 16 years old. And at that time, there was a huge fashion, change that was going on. And it was every girl had the scrunchies in her hair, and the hair was teased, and they were wearing the Madonna get up. Madonna.
Oh, yeah. Listen, when Madonna hit, like every chick was trying to wear their bra as clothes, and their parents were losing their shit on them. But that was like the style. And you're right, with the black bows, with the
Well, they wore jackets with a bustier.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in those days, I don't think they still do this anymore. So correct me, Chad, if I'm wrong, but there would be like two girls standing out in front of the store. They just stood out front, and people would walk by, and they'd wait, say hello to you or whatever. There was always two girls standing out front, and we would walk by, and we were stupid punk kids. So we didn't, we acted too cool for school. And there was one girl that would always, realize that we were little kids. Right. So she gave us attention, flirted with us, made us feel good. And then we would go down to where the movie theater was. There was always matinees. I saw Tron there. I saw Flash Gordon. What about Flash Gordon?
Oh, I was never into that. Even like and I remember Queen did like the soundtrack to that, or at least the title,
amazing
the title song. You're talking about what movie did you just mention?
Flash Gordon.
No, the one before.
Tron.
Oh, Tron. Okay. You're talking about Tron. I remember going to see Logan's Run. It had Farrah Fawcett in it. And it was about like this futuristic society. And it's the first time I ever saw titties.
You guys know you're going to get this. For those of you in chat that don't
act like you don't remember the first movie you saw that had titties in it.
It would have been something with Olivia Newton-John, or we're gonna get into that. So we're gonna get into the movies that were huge part of the 80s.
Watching Xanadu, and I'm like checking out Farrah Fawcett's tits, and
Xanadu was great. So we're gonna get into the movies that were huge culturally in the 80s that you couldn't make today. We're gonna talk about that. What's going on with the movie industry, where we're gonna name probably 7 or 8 movies on this stream that you couldn't make today, and they were huge cultural impacts. But
there's like so much that you can't do today. I was just listening when
Porky's. Samuel in chat says Porky's.
Forget about it, man.
You had no chance making that movie today,
dude. That whole scene where she's like pulling on that dick, and this is fucking
Tommy Turner. Do you remember her name?
Did you see it in the theater?
I was in high school. No, my mom would have. No way was I allowed to see. No.
We went to the drive-in in high school, and we would drink about 6 packs of beer.
Cal says Conan the Barbarian, the first rack on film I spotted. That may have been one of the early ones for me too. Donna says I wanted to be Madonna. I wore it all. Madonna was, for me growing up in Memphis, every girl in the early mid 80s, when Madonna first hit, dressed like Madonna. It was huge. And can we give a shout out to, we hadn't talked about Tina Turner. So Tina Turner just died. And, I was looking up, do you know how many records or albums she sold?
Oh, dude, she had like almost 2 careers. She had like the 50s, and then this huge resurgence in like the 80s with
Private Dancer.
Dude, fucking Thunderdome. She was in Beyond Thunderdome, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. She
transcended music and did movies.
She did.
And she was, that's another thing. We talked about New Wave, how they try to categorize music and put people into a box. But in Sith Apple, I think you're right. I've seen anywhere between 150 million to over 200 million. That is Taylor Swift numbers in today's album sales. So Tina Turner I don't think she fit into a box. She was a soul singer. She was a pop singer. You hear her being called the queen of rock and roll. She was, more than anything, she was an amazing entertainer. And
she really was. And it was like Ike and Tina Turner. And like she did all that
survived
stuff,
that.
and he was like, "Yeah, survived that." That's right. He's like beating her the whole time, thinking that it was all him, all that it's all me. If it wasn't for me, you would be nothing. And she leaves him and like just breaks out into this enormous career, private dancer, like you said, and she did a duet with I'm almost positive with
Bryan Adams.
Oh, with Brian, but she did one for Live Aid with Mick Jagger, I think.
Yeah.
So she was huge. She was everywhere.
So a couple of these chats, because we're jumping around. Samuel Gutierrez says mongoose or swim bikes. Samuel, I had a mongoose for a short period of time. It got stolen. I ended up with a Diamondback and then a GT, and then that was it. And then I got my first car, my first car was a Jeep. Mataween, we had a great escape in Nashville, and of course, Grimey's. Mataween, I'm not far from you. I'm in Nashville every week, and I'll be there tomorrow for Icon. So if you're there, I look forward to seeing you, everybody. Samuel says again, Porky's. Donna says Porky's was the first for me. Porky's I saw that at home. Mataween, Life Force. Mike Schiller says Stir Crazy was my first rated R movie. Gene Wilder.
Oh, and Richard Pryor. That's right.
They did several movies together, Silver Streak and Stir Crazy. The scene in Stir Crazy when they're in the jail and they bring the big bald-headed guy in there to stay with them, thinking that he's going to intimidate them, and they end up going, woof, woof. Remember how they're freaking out? And then they come back an hour later, the guards, and they're cheating him in poker. They're cheating the guy in poker.
That Gene Wilder was like he was such an amazing,
talented
comedian. He really was. And it's so funny because I just went back. I came across something Gilda Radner like 2 days ago. And like, I back before she died, I read her autobiography when she was really sick with cancer. But I was like, I love Gilda, and I love that pairing of her and Gene Wilder. They just made such a great pair. And then, you fall into the rabbit hole, and I'm like looking at all this Gene Wilder stuff and remembering all that and just how funny he was. It's such a great.
Gene Wilder. I mean,
Young Frankenstein.
Frankenstein, Willy Wonka, all the Richard Pryor movies. I think what did he do? Did he do Lady in Red? He could do romantic comedy. He was so talented, and so was Gilda. Ashley B says, and I got to ask you, Dick, because you were a little older than me. I did see the Cheech and Chong movies, but I saw them at home on like cable, and my mom did
drive-in theater.
So
we were 100%, man. So, we'd be quoting that stuff. We were just talking about that the other night with some friends.
So what was it like being an 18-year-old kid seeing
Dave's not here? We must have said Dave's not here like 10,000 times. Like between your circle of friends, like just like you remember that whole thing with the parrot? It's like, hey, where's Dave? Dave's not here. It's the parrot. No, I'm Dave. Dave's not here.
Donna says, remember that was also the time Saturday Night Live was awesome. Listen, that
was with Jane Curtin.
Obviously, I saw
Garrett
all
Morrison, John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, Chevy Chase.
I was raised on John Belushi and all those guys from my dad, the Blues Brothers. But for me, as a kid growing up, Saturday Night Live was Eddie Murphy. It was Eddie Murphy.
For me, Saturday Night Live was back. You had Jim Belushi as doing Samurai Delicatessen, or the Greek.
You talking about John Belushi?
Yeah, John Belushi. Or doing the Greek burger play. The chip burger. No fries.
No Coke.
Chips. No fries. Chips.
What do you say? Fries. No Coke.
No Pepsi. Coke. Pepsi. Yeah. It was just so funny. And then they did that skit with the where they were all dressed like bumblebees. You remember that, Chad?
Oh yeah.
But they were like Mexican banditos.
But Eddie Murphy, come on. When Eddie Murphy does James Brown,
he did it at the time with Joe Piscopo. You remember Joe Piscopo?
Yeah, I know, but Eddie was.
Joe Piscopo was funny then.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And Eddie Murphy was funny then. Eddie Murphy's not funny anymore, but Eddie Murphy's like Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood. Won't you be my neighbor?
Gumby. Mike Schiller says Gumby.
Oh, the Gumby was hilarious.
When
Eddie
did
Murphy
James
was funny
Brown
back there. He was.
Do
funny.
you remember when he did James Brown? Gonna
Hot
get
tub.
in the hot tub.
Going in the hot tub. Wow, hot tub. Yeah, of course I remember that shit,
And then of course he transitions
it's really
to
funny
movies.
how we like both quoted the hot tub. We go immediately to what about when he was buckwheat from Little Rascal?
You couldn't do that now. You couldn't do that now.
He's black. Of course he could do it now.
Maybe. Well, yeah, maybe.
You couldn't have a white guy do it now.
Yeah, but I think people would still get bent out of shape. You know, people get bent out of shape at Dave Chappelle, so they get bent out of shape over it. But you know, Eddie Murphy.
People get bent out of shape over everything. People look for something to be offended by now.
So let's talk about, you know, we're still in the early 80s where we're going to get to Back to the Future and some of the music. You talked about Van Halen 1984, Def Leppard. As I talked about going through the mall and we passed merry-go-round, there was something else that was huge in my childhood. And Dick, I don't know if you
Spencer Gifts with all the nasty games.
The arcade.
Oh, the arcade. Didn't you have a Spencer's Gifts?
We did have a Spencer's Gifts, but my mom did not want me going. She made me promise her.
You had to stay out of the adult section.
Yeah, she said stay out of Spencer's because it was absolutely not the place to go. And it had much different stuff that it does today. And so for the first few years, I did honor that. I didn't do that. But
for the first few years. And then he found out that's where all the dildos and butt plugs were. And he's like, hey, what the hell is this?
That is not true. Not true, chat. So we had an arcade called Sultan's Castle. And I think that was maybe a little bit of a franchise too. And there's a guy, and last time I checked, he's in his mid to late 90s. He is still alive. He was the manager of the Sultan's Castle. And tell me, Chad, if you guys, anybody that spent time in arcades, and I spent hours and hours at this arcade, where this guy, if you leaned on the arcade, he threw you out. So he was literally, he would come walking through.
Leaned on a game?
Yeah. So if your friend was playing a game and you were leaning.
Pinball or an arcade game?
The arcade games. It was an arcade. It was a dark, you know, sweet. It was placed in the mall. And he would, we're not going to leave out Michael Jackson, Donna. We're going to get to Michael in a second. So he would throw you out of the arcade. And so I just always remember him going, quit leaning on the games, you know, get away from the front of the game. Cause he thought that you were stopping other people from playing it. So, you know, we went in there. The games I remember are the ones you guys all know, the Donkey Kongs.
There's always someone getting upset about something stupid.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh yeah.
He was really.
He ran that thing like an iron fist, and
like it's an arcade, dude. This isn't like Prison Block D.
There was a system to everything, though. There was the bullies that would put their quarters down and never let anybody else play certain games. So you had to start a fight to get on a game.
What was the big game? Like the first big game? Like, dude, I was back in the beginning when like. I don't even know if you were Pong. Like my parents got Pong and like the whole neighborhood came over. I was the popular kid for a month. And all it was like two little lines as paddles. One person had one controller, one had the other. And this little white ball went. Bloop,
so
bloop.
My first one, Sith Apple, you got it. That was my first game that I remember playing lot. Was Galaga.
Oh, okay.
That was the first one. Pac-Man. You know, I didn't play Pac-Man as much. Obviously, I played it because everybody did, but it was Galaga. It was Donkey Kong. It was
Space Invaders.
Space Invaders, yeah. And then the game started upgrading. You had Street Fighter.
So I had Breakout, and like then Super Breakout came along, and Super Breakout was like, holy shit! I think I saved all my lunch money for a month and went to the hamburger place. There was a hamburger place that had a couple video games.
And then what happened was the game started having to evolve because the home system started. I got a Commodore 64. I don't know if you guys remember the Commodore 64. Then I ended up with Atari. Was it the 2600? What was the first Atari? I had the first Atari. And so the home games started. And so the arcade games were starting to struggle. And so you started to see the games evolve. And I remember walking into the arcade and they had Dragon's Lair, where it was a cartoon type game, and then evolved into
it was Space Ace.
Then it became Space Ace, and then there was a game called the Gauntlet, which was the first game where 4 people, 3 of your friends and you, could stand and play at the same time on the same game. So the games were evolving, but the arcades were struggling. And at some point, the arcades started closing where I lived, and the only arcade games you could find at that point were in the pizza parlors. But the home systems really took off, and the computer games and Sega, of course, took off in the later 80s at the end. But it was really Atari. Atari put them out of business. And Samuel says Tecmo Bowl. I broke 3 or 4 Tecmo Bowl games.
I had one of the Sega ones, and they had
Gauntlet. Mike Schiller, Gauntlet. I got into one of the worst physical fights throughout all of growing up over Gauntlet with a guy that took our quarters and just swiped them off the top of the game and started playing with his friends, and we got into a brawl.
People I think that they could just do that shit. It's like the weirdest. Hey, it's the weirdest thing. And
nobody got arrested. You just got thrown out of the mall. Just got thrown out.
So I hope you guys beat his ass.
Yeah, you'd be sitting on the curb with a bloody nose and a black eye, and nobody cared. But
you're waiting for your mom to come pick you up.
Yeah. So that was the big thing, the arcades. And then, so we're getting into the mid 80s, and then all of a sudden you have, as Donna mentioned, you have Michael Jackson, and he releases this album, Thriller. And it still got the record. I think it was the #1 album for 2 years.
Dude, when that video broke, they played it like midnight on Halloween or something, like the first showing.
Like Billie Jean or Thriller?
Thriller,
yeah. Because it was a long video.
They were like all zombies and it was really long. It was like 15 minutes or something. And didn't like Spielberg do it, or it was a big time director did it. And everybody I knew was like gathered around their television at whatever time on Halloween in their costumes and stuff to watch Michael Jackson Thriller. And it was like, they talk about King of Pop. Like he was like mega. Like people think like Justin Bieber and all these tools now. It's like, no, Michael Jackson ruled everything back then.
In terms of fame, there's in that type of fame, there was Elvis and Michael Jackson. That's it.
The Beatles collectively. Yeah. So, and we didn't even talk about, in 81, we skipped over John Lennon's death. That was a weird thing. I remember I was working in a paint store, and I was like,
John Landis directed Thriller. You're right, John and Samuel.
Oh, yeah, I knew it was like a big director.
John Landis.
When John Lennon was murdered, at the paint store I worked, there was like a moment of silence from a particular time. Like the world over was going to have like this 3 minutes of silence or whatever it was for John Lennon. And I remember the paint store was open. We all did this moment of silence thing. And there's some guy that came in. He's like, what the hell is going on? Why isn't anybody talking to me? He had these little slips of paper that told, you hand them to. He's like, oh, fuck this shit. Fuck this shit, bunch of assholes. He goes storming out of the place. But I totally remember that. It was like, that was a huge impression. I mean, he was really young then. But Elvis died really young too. Elvis was 40, 42.
Yeah, so John was John 40 and Elvis was 42. I think John was 40. Yeah, so that was big. And then, MTV at the time, for those that lived through it, exactly what I'm talking about. But for those that were born later, but love the nostalgia of the 80s. For me, I would come home from school, or in the summers, at certain times of day, they would have the world premiere video, and it would be MTV would do the world premiere, and
it was such a big deal. Like the MTV Award, why do they even have awards now? They don't even show videos anymore. But yeah, you're right. Those world premiere of videos, it was like a huge deal. And remember, MTV would ban certain videos, like Girls on Film, Duran Duran, Girls on Film was like they had an R-rated. MTV wouldn't play. They call it an X-rated version. It wouldn't play on MTV, so like they didn't play it for a long time until Duran Duran gave them like a PG version that they would actually play on there. And then everybody's searching. It wasn't like you couldn't go to YouTube. There was no internet, you know, and everybody's like looking all over trying to find the X-rated version of, you know, Girls on Film.
Oh,
everybody wants to see what they're not allowed to see. Do you remember going to rent videos? And then you go to the porno room, you have to go through the curtain.
I did. That passed me by. I never went into that room. Never went into that room.
I did.
So in the 80s, there was no Blockbuster yet. It was the local video store. And my dad knew these two guys that were partners that owned a video store. And in Memphis, it was called Video Magic. And he would call them and he'd say, "Hey, I'm going to be up there about 6 o'clock. Could you hold this and this for me?" He would ask for the movies and they'd say, "Yeah, hold on a second. Let me go grab it. It just came in today." He would know when the movie was coming in. He would call them. They would hold it. He would drive down there and they'd have it behind the counter.
Yeah, because it was a pain in the ass if you went to go get a movie and it wasn't there.
Yeah, because
then you're like searching around for something to watch for an hour.
Before Blockbuster, there was what, one copy? Maybe two?
It depended. Like it depended. If it was a big movie, there might
be
like
copies.
3. Yeah.
Yeah. But if it was Jeff Bridges and or William Hurt and Body Heat, it was one copy. It was, that's what you had to deal with. But that was, the days of MTV.
And if you were late, Jesus Christ,
they called you,
dude. My wife then had Jane Fonda something workout that she forgot about. And I was like, what the hell? Oh, will you return this for me? She didn't even want to do it because she knew how much it was going to be. So, she just like slides it up. "Oh yeah, can you return this?" And I go back, it's like $300. I'm like getting into this huge fight. And I'm like, you charge retail like $80. How can you like charge me more than it would cost to buy? Like, and I got in this big fight with
the movies. Remember the movies were, if you had to buy the movie, it was like $110 or something.
Yeah,
which was like astronomical back then. San Diego girl says, and we remember girls like you, San Diego girl. We used to stand next to the return bins waiting for something to come back.
Oh yeah, totally.
Do you know how many arguments and fights I saw with people that were standing there and someone would like nudge them, or they'd stayed a little bit closer to the door and they'd see what the movie was and they'd say, "Hey, can you toss that to me?" And then they would hand it to the person to scan. It always caused a problem. So San Diego girl, I'm sure you weren't like that, but we saw a lot of people that were.
Everybody was like that.
Yeah. So we get to, for me, the world premiere videos, the first time I really felt like, I was growing up a little bit. I was starting to put down the toys and go through
sliding into the dildo section of Spencer's.
Was when I saw Hot for Teacher, the Van Halen video, world premiere. I saw it the first time it hit. We raced home because we knew that it was coming out that day at a certain time, and it would be like noon or 3 o'clock. It would be right on the hour, right? And I just remember there was these little kids dressed like Van Halen, like the Van Halen
that was such a great video.
And it was like,
they had a kid for each member of the band. Yeah, it was like that video.
And do you remember the teacher she came out was like, "Whoa!" And I remember going,
"I don't feel tardy."
Nothing was ever the same for me again growing up. I mean, that was a seminal moment. And that Van Halen was such a heartbreaker that they come out with Jump and Panama and Top Jimmy and Hot for Teacher and I'll Wait and just the whole album. That was when you listened to every song on the album. And then you find out, because Dick, you and I talked about it. You saw Van Halen at the US Festival.
I saw Van Halen a number of times. Van Halen was like, they were my favorite band for a period of time. But yeah, I saw him at the US Festival along with like, dude, that
for those of you that don't know,
concert was like that coming of age. If my life had a coming of age movie, it would be those two concerts. Like they were like 9 months apart, and like everything that happened and all the shit I experienced and what I saw and the drugs I did and the bands I saw. Dude, I passed out in the middle of the Clash, in the middle of 500,000 people. My buddy had to throw me over his shoulder and like push me through this giant crowd to get me out in the back. That was it was a fun time.
Everyone, check out all the bands that played the US Festival.
No, Oingo Boingo, Stray Cats. There was like the second
there was
one.
Multiple US festivals. What year was it? 82, 83? 83?
I went to both. There was like 9 months apart. The 83 one had like the bigger bands and had Van Halen, had David Bowie headlined the third day. I think the Police headlined, I think the first one. And that was like at there. I remember at the end of that, the first day of like, there's the 82 one with the Police headlining, like everybody, like 500,000 people are like, trying to get out, and there's just a massive crowd, and everybody's going, yo, because Sting had everybody doing like all these humming melodies and stuff. It was so much fun.
Well, and this was the decade where we saw the festivals, beyond Woodstock and all that. We saw all these festivals, Live Aid. Donna, you mentioned Queen, the best live performance to this date that not in person, because I wasn't there in person, but that I've seen on film is Freddie Mercury at Live Aid. Unmatched.
Live Aid was broadcast on network television, and it was done in Philadelphia and in London. And Phil Collins actually played with Genesis, or I think it was with Genesis in Philadelphia, took the Concorde over to London and played drums for Led Zeppelin, which you'll never be able to find any footage of that because Jimmy Page hated it. But yeah, Led Zeppelin got back together for that. It was like the 80s were a time where benefit concerts were huge. Farm Aid, Live Aid. My son was born the night of Live Aid. We actually watched some of it on TV.
You told me about that.
In between contractions and stuff. Yeah.
So for those that know Dick from Big Brother, and I didn't get a chance to say this earlier. I'm assuming everyone knows Evil Dick more so than me, since we just started this channel a few months back, and we're new and growing. But Evil Dick was on Big Brother in 2007.
Yes.
Big Brother 8 won the show. That was back when Big Brother was getting 3 times the eyeballs that it gets now.
I think it was I don't even remember the numbers. The only reason I even remember the numbers for the show before the finale, it was like the final 3 were holding the key and all of that shit, because at the end of the show, the producers like pulled me in this room and they told me that the episode the day before the finale hit 9.9 million, which was like crazy huge numbers.
9.9 million, and the top news shows now draw 3. What does that tell you? So the US Festival, guys, check it out, because the bands, oh my God, legendary. So going back to Van Halen, so it's 1984, and I was dying to see Van Halen. I was 11 years old. I was begging my mom, let me go see this band. She was doing her homework on David Lee Roth. Every time he did something lewd in a magazine, she somehow found out about it. So everybody remembers, people that loved rock. Do you remember Hit Parader? You have to remember Hit Parader. So I was begging, and then it comes out, they've broken up. They just put out their best-selling album at the time, and they break up.
All egos, man. It was all egos. And then David Lee Roth hit the ground running and put out an EP, which was songs that he wanted to do with Van Halen, but Eddie didn't want to do them, and end up like having like 3 massive hits. California Girls, where he did the cover of the Beach Boys song, was one of the songs on there.
And Donna, we're gonna when we get
my son,
there it is.
That was who's gonna be 38 this year. This is him. He got his lederhosen. We're going to Oktoberfest, so he sent me a he sent me a picture. He's like, I'm getting all excited. I'm like, holy shit, you got your lederhosen ready.
You're gonna have to go live on that. Donna, when we get to the end of the stream tonight, I'm gonna close with a little bit of Guns N' Roses. I got a little story to tell because that gets to the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s.
Oh, Hands Across America, somebody's saying. Yeah, it was like
Hands Across America.
It was the time where people were like I said, we're coming out of the 70s and this recession and this recession in the 70s, and now was like this time of excess. This is when that movie Wall Street came out, and these people were just started making like millions of dollars, like hand over fist. And like this is when like yuppies came out, and people started like spending like crazy amounts of money on clothes, where it didn't like it might have been like that, but it didn't like touch me like until like the early 80s with like polo shirts and those the one with the little gator on it. What the fuck was that one called?
Lacoste, Izod.
Lacoste. Yeah, like those were getting popular. And
how about my mom bought me, I wanted a members only jacket, and she brings home the jacket. She brings home the jacket, and it's got the fake thing here. It's not the actual members only.
Moms were always great for that, weren't they? But it looks exactly the same, but it's not the same, Mom.
And so my sister, who was almost 3 years older than me, said, he's a non-member. He's a non-members only. Non-member. And I was so mad, little brat, because I was like, this is not a members only jacket, man. But no, 1984.
Hey, listen, man, I went through the same shit with, like I told you, with the tough skins. They getting made fun of, and I got a job so I could get wear Levi's.
The early 80s, we had, and we didn't even talk about E.T. We had movies like E.T. that were like a perfect little movie, and at the same time, we had Wall Street. So you had the beginning of Greed is Good, and then you had childhood trauma and an alien. Saving this kid that needs a friend. It was like you had a little bit of everything. You had the horror movies, the Friday the 13th, the Halloweens, the Nightmare on Elm Streets, and then you had the action movies. You had the beginning of Schwarzenegger and the Stallone getting more so into action movies. You had who else was it was the 80s, the action. You had Harrison Ford, obviously.
About Rocky against the Russian, and the Cold War was still like blazing.
And then you had 1984. We get a very pivotal year because Bruce Springsteen was not a new name.
Born in the USA.
But Born in the USA.
Blew up enormous.
Everybody confused because they didn't listen to the lyrics. Born in the USA is about a veteran who comes home and he can't, he's trying to get a job and he's disenchanted. He's not appreciated. It's not necessarily a patriotic song,
but that's the way everybody took it. Even in the dance clubs in New York, dude, everybody like Danceteria or I forget what the name was. It's an old Catholic cathedral. Somebody will know what I'm talking about. And they changed it into a nightclub. The Limelight, that's what it was. And everybody stopped and it's just Born in the USA. And then that's what Courtney Cox, remember, was it Dancing in the Dark?
She was discovered in the dance video in San Diego, girl. When we talk about the Brat Pack in a few minutes, I'm going to cover what is on my t-shirt.
Hey.
So, we'll cover that in just a minute. The most important moment for me growing up in the 80s was what that movie symbolized, but we'll get into that in a second.
John Hughes.
But yeah, so Born in the USA, you had Bruce Springsteen. Courtney Cox was discovered on the video for Dancing in the Dark.
Yeah, Bruce pulls her up on stage and they do a little dance, and then she was cast in Friends not that long after, because that video was enormous and was everywhere. And you would go to clubs and they would play the video along with the song in the clubs, and it was massive. That album of his was massive. That was that was very.
Donna, you said, did you beg for Nikes? I didn't until the later part of the 80s. So in 1984, 83, 84, Michael Jordan. And for those of you that haven't seen the movie Air, I've had the good fortune to get to know a little bit. I don't know him well, but I know Sonny Vaccaro, who Matt Damon's character is based on, because I was involved with basketball, summer grassroots basketball. So it's interesting to see Matt Damon play Sonny Vaccaro now. But the signing of Michael Jordan to Nike and the story around that, the Air Jordans. I was a kid who had the posters on my wall that, like you see in the backdrop that we did for our thumbnail. You know, the Empire Strikes Back. I had that poster, but I also had Farrah Fawcett, the famous Farrah Fawcett poster on my wall. Dude, and I had on the other side of my wall,
I paid a lot of attention to that poster of Farrah Fawcett. Let me tell you, I was like coming into like my teenage years, and I never shut the lights when I jerked off. Let me tell you.
Thank you, YouTube. So I had two other posters. I'm gonna watch my segue.
Don't act like you didn't jerk off to that poster. Like everybody, every male in the United States jerked off to that poster. She was phenomenal.
I was too young. So on the other side of my wall, I had Dr. J, Julius Erving, and I had the Iceman, George Gervin, who played for the Spurs, and they made these posters. And the Iceman looked like he was in an ice palace, and the basketballs were frozen. And Dr. J was a doctor with a stethoscope and a white jacket on. And that was pre-Michael Jordan. So I was a big Dr. J fan, and then Michael Jordan came in. And so I think I got into the Nike game wanting Nikes. I remember that because I played basketball. So I remember that was the later part of the 80s for me. So 84, the Air Jordans, they did take off, but in my mind, in my memory, maybe I'm not right, Donna, but I think that the Nikes became much more in demand. That's the poster I had right there, Dick.
Yeah. Me too.
You know, they came later, but Underoos, Mike Schiller. So don't get me started on Underoos.
Are you like young enough to be wearing Underoos?
No, Underoos was.
Like I put my kid in Underoos.
Yeah, Underoos. I kind of passed. I kind of went over that, but there was some kids that lived in my neighborhood that were a couple years younger, maybe 3 years, 2 or 3, and it seemed like that hit them right there. They wore the Underoos. They wore them outside like they were costumes. It was weird, but I
think I got my son like.
So
do you remember
Mike Schiller says something that I did wear and wore religiously during the summer were Jams. Dick, did you wear Jams?
Oh, I had Jam shorts and a couple of Jam shirts.
Yeah, so you had all the multicolors, right?
Oh, they were like super like primary colors, just pow.
Yeah,
it's a Hawaiian company.
Yeah. I wore Mike Schiller.
They're awesome.
I wore Jams every summer for at least 3 years, at least. That was that everybody did. So 1984. We have Bruce Springsteen, we have Madonna, and we talked about Tina Turner, and we have Prince. And that album, when that album hit, then the movie comes out. So Purple Rain.
We had a pretty big hit before in the album before with Little Red Corvette.
Little Red Corvette, yeah. We had 1999, Little Red Corvette.
1999, yeah.
But when
Purple
the
Rain
Revolution
came out,
Purple Rain, and then the movie, which
deal.
I don't remember going to. I wasn't old enough to go to the theater to see the movie. My mom would not let me anyway, but I do remember watching it at home, and it was pretty. I mean, it was pretty rated R, right? There were some scenes in there that my mom was not happy. My dad rented the movie, and we would sneak in. My mom would go to sleep, and my dad would let my sister and I watch the movies.
What's so funny is your parents tried to like shield you from same with me. I was sent to all these Christian schools and stuff. Dude, my mother like would bust in. I'm not lying. Like between 11 and 11:30, she wouldn't knock. She'd just come busting in my bedroom door because she knew I was watching Benny Hill, and then I would get in trouble, and I would they'd get my TV taken away for watching Benny Hill because he was a pervert. But it's like, did that keep me from becoming a pervert later? No. So they always try to shield you, but
Yeah. Samuel Gutierrez says Apollonia replacing Vanity. Apollonia and Apollonia 5. Trust me, I remember that.
He made all of them. We wouldn't even know who Morris Day in the Time was.
Morris Day. Hey, I loved Morris Day in the Time. Jerome with the Mirror. Morris Day still plays shows. He still plays shows. He played near here a while back. but yeah, Prince was huge. And the movie comes out. He played in Memphis, and I have to look it up. It was either 2 days in a row or 3 days. And only the biggest names, I think Bruce Springsteen did it. Prince did it. And it was 2 or 3 days in a row in Memphis, sold out, and it was pandemonium. You couldn't get a ticket. And, you know, I couldn't go to the concert. My sister begged to go. And so that I remember that vividly. And still to this day, I can listen to that album, every single song. That was back when there were artists they put out an album and it was every single song. And Prince.
Yeah, you started saying something about that earlier, and then we got distracted. But I again, and I say it all the time because I was over at my friend's house, and his son is, I think he's either 21 or 22. I think he's 22, and like they only listen to songs. Like nobody listens to albums anymore, and it's like
really a shame.
You are missing out on so much really great music. There's albums that I would listen to. I only listen to albums. I don't like subscribe to any of these songs, Spotify or Apple Music or any of that shit. I listen to albums. So, how many times have you like bought an album when you were a kid and you're like you said, every single song is just like amazing, and you wouldn't have known about the rest of the album if it wasn't for like Purple Rain and Darling Nikki is why you bought the album. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
yeah, great song. And so in 1984 was the year of, you know, Prince and Bruce Springsteen. And it was just, you know,
those were our pop stars then.
Yeah. Madonna, Bruce, Michael Jackson, Bruce Springsteen, Prince, and Madonna, Bruce Springsteen, Michael Jackson, Prince. Those four were huge. And then you had all the bands. We've talked about the new wave bands. We talked about the hair bands and the rock and roll bands, and then the pop artists. But 1985 brings in, to me, and I started off the stream talking a little bit about it, probably one of the most perfect movies that has been made. Whether you like the genre or you don't like it, it literally, I think, is a perfect movie.
Who doesn't like it? If you grew up in that time, I don't know anybody that
Back to the Future was a perfect movie. And Michael J. Fox had done the TV show. And for those that get a chance, I know not everybody has all these streaming platforms.
You're talking about Family Ties?
Yeah, he was doing Family Ties. But there's a documentary out now on Apple Plus called Still, Still. It's sad, but it's also inspiring. It's a documentary about Michael J. Fox, and it's him today. And but man, what a, you know, it'll bring you to tears, but it also shows you how really tough this guy was and is. And it reminded me, I took him for granted. Growing up, Michael J. Fox was just like your brother. He was like an American kid,
It's such a shame. I feel like we were robbed of his talent.
Yeah, you saw him on TV, and then he does Back to the Future, and
what was that war movie he was in too? He was in with Sean Penn. It was huge.
Oh, the war. What was the war movie, guys? In chat, I can see it now. Sean Penn, Michael J. Fox. It's in the documentary. Valor, no.
But right now, it's Casualties of War, 1989.
So for those of you that may or may not be able to see, so behind me, I've got the skateboard from Back to the Future 2. There's Michael J. Fox right there. There's E.T. and Elliot. There's Raiders, Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail. All these things you see here, Han Solo and Carbonite, Elliot and E.T.
Who's the one all the way down on your left?
Unfortunately, that's angry, giving up on life Luke Skywalker from The Last Jedi, which I need to take that off my.
Hey, listen, it was not Mark Hamill's fault.
Donna, if you've seen any of my other videos, you've seen me on Echo Base. I love Luke, and I hope that they somehow figure out how to fix what's going wrong. But that's for another video, another stream. But 1985.
Another show.
Yeah, another show.
We haven't talked about John Hughes movies, dude.
we're getting there. So
I told you Back to the Future. I was with
Vacation.
my first wife. We went in to see it at the movie theater. I never in my life before or after have done this. We walked out of the theater. We're in the parking lot going to the car, and I'm like, we're just talking about what a great movie it was. And I'm like, I turn around, and that's when they had the marquee and they had the times up, like you could see from the parking lot. It wasn't like through where the cashier was, like it was like out there. So I'm like, there's one starting in 5 minutes. Let's go see it. And she just starts laughing. She's like, really? I'm like, yeah, let's go. And we turned around and paid and went back into the theater and watched the movie again. Never did it before, never did it after. That movie was so fantastic.
And to me, obviously the rest of them don't hold a candle to the first one, but I can still watch the second one and really enjoy it. I can, the second one.
When he started playing electric guitar and was on his back sliding across the stage, and everybody's like, he's like middle America, and they're all like, what the hell is going on? I couldn't stop laughing.
Johnny Be Good. This is for Donna. Donna says, Luke was my imaginary boyfriend when I was 14. So here you go, Donna. I don't know if you could see this. Here is the bubble gum, the cards with the bubble gum you'd buy at the store. This is Return of the Jedi. It's a PSA 10. It is Luke Skywalker. So,
I saw John is in the chat, and he's talking about Eric Stoltz was supposed to play Marty McFly. And I saw the audition like recently within the last 6 months.
Well, they were filming. They did some filming and then fired him.
Oh, I don't remember that.
And it's covered when you see the documentary on Apple Plus. Still, they talk about how he's on the show and they had to negotiate to get him to leave Family Ties when he would film. He would get picked up by a driver, go to the set of Back to the Future, be picked up by the driver, taken back to the set. It was brutal, just nonstop, and doing both at the same time.
Sucked for Eric Stoltz though. Eric Stoltz was like, I really liked Eric Stoltz. He was in some really great movies. He had that character in Pulp Fiction where he was the drug dealer to John Travolta. Remember John Travolta had Uma Thurman, she OD'd, and he's like, don't come over here. And he's like, I'm on your lawn. Come out here right now.
Eric Stoltz made out okay.
Eric Stoltz is great.
He made out okay.
He's going to be a bigger star than he ended up being.
Yeah. But you mentioned, so we got National Lampoon's Vacation, and we got Fast Times at Ridgemont High we didn't talk about. How did Fast Times, did that impact you at all? Did you feel
Fast
like that?
Times, like Sean Penn's character was us. Like Sean Penn's character was us in high school. We were like stoned all of the time. We had matter of fact, we had an auto body first period, and one of my friends had a van. And before we went into we do classroom stuff for like half an hour, and then we work on our cars it's like 2 periods for like, I don't know, like 2 hours. We work on our cars, and we would be in his van just like smoking up, getting fucking stoned. I thought
you were gonna say you were the guy that sold the scalp tickets, Damone.
No, that wasn't me.
Or you were Judd Hurst, or was it?
I was like high school. I was like still kind of like coming into my own. Like I don't know. I was a very shy kid, and then I think high school is like when I started coming out of my shell. And then after high school is like where I really like kind of like found trying to find who I was and became like a lot more outgoing.
So we get to 1986 and we're talking about John Hughes. And
John Hughes was like, he had such the finger of the pulse of that generation. With all like ramble off all of his movies, man. It was like The Breakfast Club, and
so let me read this. I have this T-shirt, and on the inside of Judd Nelson, who plays John Bender, and inside the imprint of my shirt here is the words to this letter. And the movie ends with the letter of the students that have to spend Saturday at the school, and the principal that judges all of them doesn't understand them, and they all have to write a letter of why they were there, what they did to get in trouble.
Oh, that's right.
And so they didn't do individual letters. They did one letter. And Anthony Michael Hall is the one that penned it. And at the end of the movie, it says, "Dear Mr. Vernon, we accept the fact that we had to sacrifice a whole Saturday in detention for whatever it was we did wrong. But we think you're crazy to make an essay, for us to make an essay telling you who we think we are. You see us as you want to see us, in the simplest terms, in the most convenient definitions. But what we found out is that each of us is a brain, an athlete, and a basket case, a princess, and a criminal. Does that answer your question? Sincerely yours, The Breakfast Club." And I watched that movie, and that, man, that's the first time I watched something where I felt like I saw myself. I saw myself in the Emilio Estevez character, and kind of what he was going through, right? And so that made a lasting impact on me. And John Hughes, and then you have 16 Candles, which had comedy, but also was,
and like the other one with that generation was what was the other one with the Brat Pack? The St. Elmo's Fire.
St. Elmo's Fire. Those movies were,
because there was someone that every single person could relate to,
identify with
in those
now
movies.
Now what they didn't, you and I know what they didn't do back then was they didn't have necessarily people of color in those movies. And we look back now, we know that, right? There's certain things that you can acknowledge that is hopefully has gotten better, but you can't go back. I saw Molly Ringwald talked about how she was uncomfortable with some of the stuff from 16 Candles today, and you can't do that. You can't. You can't.
When she watched it today, no, like I can understand. I can understand it, but it was a different time. Yes, it is unfair, but it was a different time, and you can't. People forget that, and that's why like this butthurt generation that we're in, they look back and they're like, "You did this 25 years ago," and it's like, well, that was accepted and it was okay then. It wasn't like, it was socially accepted and like nobody was like raising alarm or anything else. It was just is what it was. And now people act like you're not allowed either as a person or as a society to grow and mature and to realize that things that you did in your past weren't all that, some of the stuff wasn't all that great. And now but you should be able to realize that and not vilify it or demonize it.
The movies, you couldn't make 16 Candles now because Anthony Michael Hall, the scene where Jake Ryan's girlfriend is drunk and he hands him the car and says, "You take her." And, there's John Hughes would have evolved as a filmmaker, but these movies still defined a generation.
Yeah, 100%.
They helped people get through tough times. And like you said, you could see yourself and you could laugh at yourself. And Pretty in Pink, had the same thing. Can't Buy Me Love. Remember Can't Buy Me Love? It was comedy, but it was about a guy trying to belong. And then he realizes the girl that he thinks has everything, she doesn't feel like she belongs either. And so these movies, they didn't preach to you, but like Revenge of the Nerds, you could not make that movie today. But that movie at the end was every single person on the screen basically saying, "I'm a nerd too."
Animal House, like all of that stuff.
I mean,
because you're going to offend like somebody somewhere about something. I was looking at, while we're talking, I was looking at like all these movies like John Hughes did is Pretty in Pink, The Breakfast Club, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I just watched that. Ferris Bueller,
so
Vacation, Christmas Vacation, Home Alone, The Great Outdoors.
So Sith Apple, if I'm wrong, tell me if I'm wrong. But I saw an interview with Anthony Michael Hall where he talks about John Hughes and him got a little bit sideways because he wrote Ferris Bueller for Anthony Michael Hall.
Oh, no shit!
And Anthony Michael Hall couldn't do it, or had some other commitment or something was going on. I can't remember, and they got a little bit. Because basically, they talk about, well, John Hughes, his muse was Molly Ringwald, but he also, Anthony Michael Hall, he wrote a lot of these parts for him. And so, these movies were seminal. 1986, I talked about Can't Buy Me Love. I believe that was 87. And then, you get to a couple things happen. I think in 1986, Dick, I don't know where you were, but I was in school, and when I was a little kid, every time there was a shuttle launch with NASA, we watched it in our schoolroom on TV. And by 1986, people had gotten bored with the shuttle launches, and so they weren't showing it in the classroom. There were so many of them going on.
Yeah, exactly. There were so many.
But they had put a teacher in space, Krista McCullough, and so it got some news, got some press, and so I was in gym class, and my PE teacher had a radio because we weren't watching it on TV. This was the first time
that like an astronaut, like a normal person,
yeah.
Space. It wasn't like somebody that went through
part of the education program. They're going to put a teacher in space.
It was a school teacher. She was like junior high or something.
And I remember I was in gym class, and my PE teacher, she started crying. We're like, "What's going on?" And she said that the Challenger exploded. So we rushed back to our classrooms, and they had the TVs in there, but they turned them on, and it was brutal. It's like 9/11, but not on that level. But I remember that vividly. That was 1986, and then it was the beginning of the end of the decade. The last few years, you started seeing music change a little bit. The beginning of the boy bands, the hair bands were you still had some big bands now. You had Def Leppard came back with Hysteria. You had Van Halen that came with Sammy Hagar. You had the beginning of Metallica. So you had hard rock, and you had the beginning of Guns N' Roses towards the end of the decade. But the music was changing. It was harder. It was, some of the hair bands were struggling, and it was only the top. It was only like maybe the top 10 that were still doing really well. And of course, Dick was your friend. You were friends with Janie.
Kiss was like,
Kiss took the makeup off.
70s, but they took the makeup off, and they had some good albums. They had some very good albums.
And you were friends with Janie Lane and Warren, who at those times,
but not back then. I was friends with Janie later.
But back then, you see a band like that where they came along, and it wasn't about how you looked. And what was the earlier part of the 80s, it was, what are your songs saying? The songwriting ability. And that's
it was about how it was called hair metal.
Well, but
everybody had a hair out to here.
Yeah,
it's like
but the band's
fucking hair with what was it, the Aquanet hairspray? It was crazy.
And they were still kind of fighting that, right? But it was starting to change where you're starting to, the songs have more gravitas to them, and it was changing. And then you had the beginning of the Berlin Wall falling. And
that was huge. That was huge. If you're a Cold War kid, like
huge,
it was massive. And like we were only taught in the United States. Of course, you're only taught what your government wants you to know. And like I like going through school, I didn't realize that Russia lost 50 million soldiers in World War II, and they were fighting like Germany too. And I didn't like learn that stuff until like later in life. But the Berlin Wall falling. Dude, we grew up with stories about people like sneaking out of the East trying to get to the West. Like we hear about hot air balloons in the middle of the night, or tunnels, or people like hiding in trunks of cars and, trying to get through Checkpoint Charlie. I'm going to Berlin after Munich in September, and I want to go and see Checkpoint Charlie and pieces of the wall that are still standing and stuff. It was like huge growing up in that era.
A lot of change, and then we're talking about movies, pop culture, and how the styles were changing, the clothing was changing. I remember in your neck of the woods in LA, the movie took place in LA, and it stuck with me too, which was Less Than Zero. Other than Weird Science, when I saw Robert Downey Jr. had a small part in Weird Science, which that was another movie I loved.
He had a good part in Weird Science. He had a great part in Weird Science.
Yeah. But then comes Less Than Zero, and to me that was the first time I was starting to hear, MTV was starting to change. They had the beginning of hip hop and rap, and it was getting edgier. You had the Run DMC from the early part of the 80s that were, I don't want to say they were safe, but you could get away with listening to it. And then all of a sudden I remember Less Than Zero, and it was, I'm going back to Cali, and you had the Bangles, Hazy Shade of Winter, and you had the Cult, the soundtrack, and then the
whole
drug
movie,
scene.
Less Than Zero, was like nothing but about drugs.
It was, and it was like
Robert Downey Jr. Like the actors, I don't know if it's an excuse or if it's just the story they tell, but it was the same thing with River Phoenix, where they're like, I was like researching a role, and it brings you into like hanging out with junkies and stuff, and so like to really experience the role, I started doing drugs, and I think that everybody there. I don't think there's been a better story of going from like the highest highs to the lowest lows, and then this redemption story of coming back to Robert Downey Jr. with Iron Man, where he was like Charlie Chaplin. Didn't he get an Oscar nomination for Charlie Chaplin, and then he ended up in the fucking state pen because he was like so fucked up he went to sleep in his neighbor's home and crawled into bed with his neighbor's kid, and then he got busted in prison buying heroin or cocaine or something, and added more time. And you're just like, oh man, I wish that guy would get his shit together. And he gets out of prison, and he got his shit together. He got his life together.
And Jon Favreau took a chance on him.
He begged for that part. He camped out on his porch, like begging for that part.
We skipped out. We did skip over. Samuel Gutierrez talked about Risky Business. Tom Cruise. The 80s gave us Tom Cruise. So
huge.
Risky Business. Loved the movie, and then he did Top Gun. But there was another movie that I can't believe I didn't mention because it was huge when I was a kid. 1981, I think. The Outsiders. The Socias and the Greasers.
The cast of The Outsiders.
Amazing.
Absolutely. Look, I'm not even looking. I swear, there's nothing here. From what I remember, it's Patrick Swayze, Rob Lowe, Tom Cruise, C. Thomas Howell. I'm missing at least one or two.
So hey, how about this? I'll do you one better. Patrick Swayze played Daryl. Rob Lowe played Soda Pop. Emilio
Ralph Macchio was in that too.
He played Johnny. Matt Dillon played Dallas.
Oh, Matt Dillon. I forgot Matt Dillon.
Emilio
Estevez. That cast was like amazing.
Emilio Estevez played.
Oh, that's right.
Two-Bit. And Tom Cruise. This is the one a lot of people always forget, but he played a guy named Steve. And so then you had Cherry, who was played by the beautiful, talented Diane Lane. Great movie. Loved it. Can still watch it. I have a T-shirt downstairs that has The Outsiders, the cover of the book by S.E. Hinton. Love it. So Tom Cruise, Top Gun, and that, I'm going to wrap up this stream in a few minutes. I'm going to come back to Top Gun as we wrap up this stream and why I wanted to do this stream as it applies to the other stuff that we cover on our channel and what's going on in entertainment today in the world and why we did a YouTube channel. So I'm going to tie that back when we talk about Top Gun and what's going on today. And I see Greg Getman. Look, The Last Dragon, Bruce Leroy, show enough. I watched The Last Dragon probably 20 times. I saw The Last Dragon. It's not the best movie of the 80s. I know you're just being funny. But, Leif Garrett, he played one of the Socias in the movie.
Oh, Leif Garrett. I forgot.
Yep.
Leif Garrett was a huge teen idol, man. He's actually a very nice guy. I got to meet him like later down the line. But like super, super nice guy. He was on like a Celebrity Rehab.
He was. Yeah, he was.
And then I met him. I either met him like right before or right after that. I can't remember.
But 1987, Less Than Zero, you had, again, we talked about the Berlin Wall. You had, obviously, Michael Jordan. At that point, Donna, Nikes were huge. Donna, I'm going to hopefully give you a little treat here. Here's a little bit of history for you that ties into me. Donna says in the chat, Roadhouse was the best of the late 80s. Let me give you a little story about Roadhouse, and Evil Dick can verify this. So I'm a Memphis kid. I grew up right down the street, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but I grew up right down the street from Red West. And Red West played Red Webster in Roadhouse. So if you remember the movie Roadhouse, he ran the little dollar store, the hardware store. He was Red Webster, and he was the guy that at the end shoots the guy and blows him away, and helps out Patrick Swayze's character. So I got to know Red. He went to the same church as I did, and Got to know him and his wife, Pat, somewhat well, and would have dinner at their house. And Patrick Swayze gave him a Palomino horse as a gift after Roadhouse. Red's was not a very sentimental guy. He died a couple years ago. He stole the horse. A lot of people don't know that, but so Red was, for those that may or may not know, Red was Elvis's right-hand guy for 20 plus years.
Oh, right on.
Yeah, he was the guy that protected him in high school before he became famous, and was with him all the way up to the latter end of 1976, so about 8 months before Elvis died. So good guy, old school guy, tough guy. He was a stunt man, but he did a lot of movies. I think he did The Rainmaker with Matt Damon in Memphis, but that was one he was well known for, was Roadhouse. And so there's a little tie in there, Donna. Great action movie. Patrick Swayze, Patrick Swayze, has had so many great movies. Dirty Dancing and Red Dawn. And I mean, who doesn't love Patrick Swayze?
No, dude, he died way too young.
One of the all-time greats. Yeah. Yeah. And so, the auto store, Samuel. Yeah, that was it. Red Webster's was his name for the movie. Yeah, I miss Red. An old school guy. He reminds me of some of my coaches I had growing up. Just old school, tough guy. But had some great stories, great Hollywood stories. But so as we get to the Berlin Wall falling, and Donna, if you're in Nashville, I'll tell you some more this weekend because I leave tomorrow. I'll be in Nashville for Icon Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I think I have Donna, I don't know. Did you get the VIP passes for Icon, Donna? So you guys,
hey, let's not forget we talked about Eddie Murphy with Saturday Night Live, but in the 80s, you got to remember that guy ruled the box office with 48 Hours and Beverly Hills Cop. Both those movies were like
Trading
awesome.
Places.
Trading Places. That movie was fantastic. You're right. Yeah, it's he was like killing it at the box office.
So Donna, I don't know. You probably can't see the Superman on my camera here, but I have a Superman statue. Let me slide over here. It's a little heavy. Can you see it?
Oh, that's a big statue. That's cool as shit.
Yeah, it's heavy too. Christopher Reeve is my Superman, Donna. Always will be. So at the end of the day, we get towards the latter part of that, and I think music was changing. You started to see a lot of the rap take off. It was the first time I heard NWA, and Dick, it wasn't new to you. You were living in LA, so it was not foreign to you.
I got into a fight with one of the guys in NWA in one of my nightclubs, and like that was I'm not kidding when I say this. My manager pulled me off, brought me out of the back of the whole place, had a cab waiting for me because he didn't even want me taking my own car home because he was afraid that they were going to follow me home. And that was the last shift I worked at that place. One of the guys, he followed me in the back of the house. Somebody stole a bottle out of my well. They leaned over. It was weird. It was a weird setup. And they were sitting on the bar, and he leaned over and grabbed a bottle. And I grabbed the dude by the throat and brought him to the bar. And he was like, "Let me go. I'm going to kill you, man." And I'm like, "Give me back my bottle. I'm going to kill you, man. Give me back my bottle." As soon as somebody put the bottle up, I took the bottle and I let him go. And the dude stood up, and he was a monster. He was huge. And I rang the bell, and some bouncers came over, and the manager, and I went in the back of the house, and one of the guys followed me back there, and I ended up just beating the shit out of him. And that's when they were afraid for my life, because there was no bullshit, man. It's
listen, when you grow up, in the South where I did, and or anywhere outside of the East Coast, West Coast, and so to hear NWA, it was a shock to the system. It was, whoa, what am I missing? What is it? I remember it actually. I was not driving yet, but I got my driver's license in 1989. Got my first vehicle, which was a Jeep, in 1989. But I remember going to a house party. I was hanging out with friends that were driving, so I went to a house party, and they were playing NWA, and it was probably 90% white people at the party, 90-10 ratio, something like that. And I was like, and I was listening to the words. I was like, whoa, 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 this is
I was singing, fuck the police.
It was like, what is going on? It was, but that was, I mean, that was revolutionary. That was, art. It had started with, the evolution, which became hip hop, and then merged into rap. And then they again, we go back to these things, labels, right? They labeled it gangster rap, right? So but it was an art form, and so you saw different people having different takes on that, right? And you had Public Enemy, who were definitely more like the social conscience, what was going on in the country, and then you had NWA.
People outside of LA, they don't understand like what was going on at that time. And if you go back, it was like
with Daryl Gates.
Daryl Gates was like, and the Rodney, what's his name?
Rodney King.
Rodney King riots. And like back then, they had like these crack houses that they'd fortify the doors, and like the cops couldn't batter and ram in there. So here comes Daryl Gates. This was like the beginning of them getting all the excess military shit and using them in police forces. And he literally bought tanks and that would like just drive through, like not the door, but like the entire front of the fucking house. And there was like a number of times where the motherfucker drove in the wrong house. It's like, oh, sorry, you have a tank-sized hole in the fucking front of your house. We meant to go next door. But like, this is like what was going on back then. It was insane.
Yeah.
And South Central, and I went to one of the schools. Snoop Dogg. I got into a fight with a black guy, and in my school district, if there was an interracial fight, like we were fighting just because we were like mad at each other. It had nothing to do with you're white and you're black. But it didn't matter to them. If it was an interracial fight, both kids got kicked out of the school and sent to other schools within the district. And they sent me to the all-black school, which was Poly, which is where Snoop Dogg went. And they sent him to the all-white school in Lakewood. Just like, it was like so weird. And like, I didn't last long in that school. I don't know how we did. I had no idea. But
by the end of the 80s, I was, my hero from the movies, George Lucas. We didn't talk about Return of the Jedi. The final Star Wars movie came out in 83. By 85, there were still toys, but they were dwindling, and I was kind of getting beyond the toys. I was, you're growing up. And so, Star Wars just disappeared for about 8 to 10 years. And I think Timothy Zahn, the author of the book Heir to the Empire in the early 90s, brought it back, and I credit him. But it was the back half of the 80s,
when that stuff came out on VHS, it like, there was another resurgence. And then
the special editions
came out, and everybody had to check out. Like,
but that was in the late 90s, 96, 97. And then they announced you. But in the late 80s, you still had the Back to the Future franchise. Someone mentioned Karate Kid 2. You had the Karate Kid franchise.
Yeah.
But movies were changing. The subject matters were changing. As we kind of get to the end and we get to 1989 and Guns N' Roses and the things were getting harder, we were seeing the beginnings of what was going on in the Seattle scene with what became grunge. Again, they created a genre and called it grunge.
Well, towards the end of the 80s it was all sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Yeah,
That's the mantra of Hollywood.
And grunge was a response to the fact that Michael Jackson's record Bad was on the charts, and you had Michael Jackson, you had the boy bands, and it was a response to that. But at the end of the 80s, towards the end, I was getting to where, I wanted my driver's license. The styles were changing, the jeans were getting baggier, and people were kind of looking a little bit more, wearing looser clothing and hoodies, and
it's because you could hide guns without people knowing. And that went along with a lot of the rap music. Like I said before, it was like music influences fashion.
And did you feel like, how old were you in 91? I graduated high school in 91. How old?
93, I would be 30. So I was.
So did
28.
you feel like at the end of the 80s, did you feel like as we're getting to the end of the decade, did you feel like that people were getting a little bit disenchanted?
I don't know. It was just like it was just changing. It was just changing a bit, and you didn't. It like happened slow, so it like
it's
wasn't.
almost like you didn't realize it was over.
No, yeah, exactly. Just like you didn't realize, like in the '90s, you didn't realize that like that whole like hair metal era was like grunge killed that. Everybody welcomed grunge with open arms. They didn't know that they were like bringing the Grim Reaper into their favorite music to kill it. But things change. Nothing ever stays the same.
Yeah, and that's what makes it
from Elvis to the Beatles to Janis Joplin and the '70s music to the '80s.
Yeah, and Mike Schiller, one of my father's favorite movies. I watched it with him probably 15 times. Was Eddie and the Cruisers. Loved it. John Cafferty.
Dude, I had the soundtrack to that. It was fantastic. I love that movie. The soundtrack was great.
Loved it. And I was heartbroken that the sequel, was just not good. But the original, it still holds up. Still great. Pale Rider, Greg. All the Clint Eastwood movies were great. Even the ones where he had the orangutan, Any Which Way You Can, Every Which Way But Loose.
Those were fun.
But let's talk as we get to the end of the '80s.
Here's
the things that you couldn't do today. You couldn't make Vacation today. You couldn't make Revenge of the Nerds today. You couldn't make 16 Candles. You couldn't do Can't Buy Me Love. You couldn't do The Breakfast Club. You couldn't do Pretty in Pink. You couldn't make any of those movies. You couldn't. The bands that would be accused of being chauvinistic and sexualizing. Like some of the rock bands, that were sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You wouldn't have access to them. And then the things on TV that were out there, MTV was, they weren't covering up things for so it was like, MTV. I don't know how you could do an MTV today. First of all, the generation now, it's too quick. There's no nuance, right? We watch things on MTV. You talked about being friends with Ricky Rackman. They would have Headbangers Ball. They'd have different, those shows would be 3 hours long. And it'd be like, we're on at 10 o'clock. And
how many times do you go to party and have MTV on as the music, but then MTV would play like 5 really shitty songs right in a row. And like, now it's just like, you put up with it then. Now it's like, Spotify, like next, give me
and we didn't talk about when I was growing up. We talked about working at the mall. When I was getting close to getting my driver's license.
Did you ever work at the mall?
I did not. I worked in a Sharper Image that was kind of a outdoor mall type setup. The shops, the outdoor. What do you call it?
Sharper Image still has their catalogs. They have some like nice stuff.
Yeah.
I tried to get a job at Mike's Munchies, a sandwich place, but they wouldn't hire me.
I
never worked in the mall.
I didn't do good because every time someone would ask me, they had these soles you put in your shoes, the gel soles, and people sold them like hotcakes at Sharper Image. And every time they would come in, I would say, they go, oh, if I get 3 pairs of these, can I get a discount? And I would say, those things leak. We have like 300 of them in the back. They're defective. And the manager would catch me and say, if you do that one more time, you're fired. I was like, this is not for me. But the other place that doesn't exist near where I live anymore, it does where you live, but it's more commercialized, is one of the best gigs to get for a job. And when I was 15, 16 years old, was at the water park. We had a park called Adventure River, and it had the water slides and the wave pool, and that's where you hung out. And my buddies were some of the managers, and they would close the park down at night, and they had a big movie screen above the wave pool. We'd sit out and watch a movie at night, and those were the best summers. Those were, that's before cell phones. We all had pagers. So if you were driving around cruising and you got a page from the girl you were talking to or seeing, and it was call me, and you'd pull over to a payphone and she'd say, I just talked to Lisa and she just drove by you guys, and y'all had 2 girls in the car with you. No, it wasn't us. You
remember when you had the pager, like you'd put in certain numbers and it would like make words if you flipped it upside down or something. You know what I'm talking about? You put in a number.
Yeah. Greg Getman. Sometimes Jeremy and I had to watch pay-per-view movies through the static channels. Absolutely.
Oh, that was all the porn. You catch a nipple here and like a vagina there.
Absolutely. So we get to the end, and so to me, I talked about Guns N' Roses, and I said I was going to come back to them. I get my driver's license. I drive, and I'm a junior in high school, and we get to the end of the 80s, and Guns N' Roses was a concert that I went to it signaled the end of my
childhood,
growing up, right? I was becoming a young man and I was making bad decisions. And so that Guns N' Roses concert, the band was like, they just caused a riot in Montreal, Dick? Was it Montreal?
When he jumped off the stage and got into a fight because somebody was taking his picture.
There was, if you remember at the time,
Axl's always been a dick.
It was Use Your Illusion, and it was the early 90s, so it was the end of the 80s, and we're going to wrap it back up, but they were threatening to arrest him in like 3 states and 2 countries, and it was chaos. They didn't take the stage in Memphis until like 11:30. They were supposed to go on at like 8:30, but it was a hell of a concert. They were dangerous. They were, it was different. And I remember right before that, I'd gone to a friend's house and they'd handed me a CD. And CDs had taken off. Cassette tapes were falling by the wayside. That was another thing. You got the CD player in your car, so that was different. And at the time, I don't know about you guys, but in my Jeep, I didn't have a built-in CD player, so I had to get one and attach it. And so when you hit a bump, the CD skipped. And
CDs weren't supposed to scratch either. Remember that? It's not like
record.
They won't scratch. Liars.
Oh, yeah. They all scratched.
Yeah.
And so I went over and a friend handed me Nirvana's Nevermind. And to me, that signaled, that was 91. That signaled that when we're in a whole new world, new decade, and I remember thinking like, look, I mean, all my childhood and growing up, that's gone. It's in the past. And so for me, when I started this YouTube channel and we're talking about stuff like Star Wars and Game of Thrones and 1923 and Yellowstone, the reason why I'm talking about those things that I enjoy and putting it out there as a new channel is because that was the nostalgia of my childhood. When I talk about Yellowstone in 1923, I'm thinking back to the Clint Eastwood movies, the Westerns, the things that I grew up watching with my dad, the expansive Westerns that they filmed on location and the storytelling around that. And when I think about Game of Thrones, I think about, we didn't talk about it, but I was a huge King Arthur, Excalibur, and some of the movies around that type of fantasy that was out there. And
Sean Connery was in a movie called Camelot. Remember that back in the 80s?
He was also in Highlander.
That's right.
And The Quickening. And so when I talk about Game of Thrones, I love Game of Thrones. I love House of the Dragon. And hopefully you guys see it when we do the videos that, it's why we do the channel we have, is because the content brings me back to the nostalgia. Star Wars was a huge part of my childhood. The toys, the world building that Lucas did, and then it all ended. He got divorced, and he was focused on building the businesses, THX and LucasArts and ILM, and so all that was over. And so, I'm longing for, as a fan of, wanting new material. And Dick and I, we talk about like, just give me good writing. Give me something that it feels new, because we know there's nothing truly new. When you listen to music, you're listening to somebody that's inspired by Tina Turner, that's inspired by Elvis or the Beatles or Zeppelin, or, nothing is new. But if you do a good job and you're truthful to the storytelling or to what you're putting out, people are going to accept it, because they know when you've got an agenda, and they know when you're being sincere and just telling a story or trying to entertain. And you can deliver messages through your art if you're not pushing it. Let the art be the art. And so the 80s for me was the best time to grow up. It wasn't perfect. We talked about some of the things that was the issues, but, growing up and going to the movies and going to the mall and going to the water parks and the arcades and riding your bike and spending all summer with your friends and doing those things, that to me, you used to hear the generations before us talk about how tough they had it, and they did. I feel like I didn't have it tough at all. I feel like I had the best decade of growing up in the 80s. It was, by 1993, my father had died. And so I was faced with real life stuff that I had to deal with. So I always look back to that time, and it was magical. And so that's why I'm a fan of Luke Skywalker and Indiana Jones. And so when you see somebody doing it poorly, it gets to you because it's part of who you were.
And that's what's so weird about now too. It's like people will like shit on you as you're just a hater. And it's like, no, it's like, I love this so much that it just pains me to see what they're doing to it. The same thing with with reality television, with Survivor and with Big Brother. It's like, I know what it used to be. I know how good it used to be. With the same thing with Star Wars, going back to the original trilogy to this last trilogy. And it's just like, you and me will be on the phone, like ranting and raving about what they did to Luke. And, it's like,
it's not hard. It's not hard.
Give people what they want, man. Give people what they want. It's like, you're right. It's not hard. And storytelling is like, it's like such a secondary thing now, where all of these movies, like you got all these Marvel movies, which are like massive, all of them. And all of them are like, what do I say to you? The only ones that I even like, I realize after so many of them, I don't like so many
when
of
they
them.
put 30 superheroes in the same movie?
Just one person, one dude, one villain, whatever. I don't need a whole Avengers thing where the entire movie is shot on a green screen that I feel like I'm watching like a combination of a cartoon and a video game. And like, it's just like so obvious CGI. It's just, it takes away from it from me.
You would think they would go back. And welcome, Matt Cave. I need to get with you. I want to talk to you, Matt Cave. If you guys haven't checked out Matt Cave's channel, go do that. I don't know how many people are still left in the chat. I know we've been going for about 2 hours, so we're about to wrap up. But Matt Cave, I really, really love what you do around the vintage arcade stuff. I'm a big arcade guy, so I want to pick your brain about some stuff.
We didn't even talk about pinball machines.
No, and pinball machines are having a resurgence now too. So, but yeah, Greg Getman, the first Batman, Michael Keaton's in this movie, The Flash, and people are doing reviews saying, well, Ezra's character playing The Flash, it's kind of so-so, but Michael Keaton is just great as Batman. I'm like, well, no shit. And if the Marvel team, all they've got to do is sit in a room and say, let's go back and watch the first Iron Man movie. That's all you've got to do. Like, if you want to learn how to get back to the basics, go back and watch the first Iron Man. Go back to the basics.
But they do the same thing with every character. Every character, they'll introduce them in a movie, and it's like the hero, becomes who he is, and you have the villain, and it's a good story. And then the second one, it's the hero fighting 4 or 5 villains. And then the third one, it's like he's fighting the entire world. You know what I'm saying? It's just like sometimes less is more.
Yeah. It's again, you can't cheat the rules of storytelling. Movies, music, a band. When you put a band together, you can't cheat the fact that you've got to have chemistry as a unit to be a band that's really good, and defining what is good, how successful you are. That's obviously that's a quantifiable thing. But, if you're a writer, you've got to, saying you don't understand or you haven't read the previous material. Come on. And so for me, we started this channel because I have an affinity and a love for the nostalgia, but I don't want to just see the same old things. I want to see new storytelling. But when you dip back into the waters of the things that we all grew up on, and you say, look, we're gonna do this again. Well, okay, but if you crap on it, people are gonna let you know, and they're gonna vote with their wallet. And look, we're a society that's based on capitalism and supply and demand. And you take politics out of things. You just focus on, did you put out something that was good? And I'm a big believer that it doesn't matter where they came from, what their walk of life is, whoever you are. If somebody puts something that is of quality in front of you, it's going to be successful.
And people will appreciate it, 100%.
And when you have agendas, and Matt Cave, I want to pick your brain on pinball machines. There's a big resurgence right now around pinball machines. They're doing the screens, right, where you download. They have all these different pinball games, and you can just choose which one, and it's like an LED screen on the pinball, and they even have the buttons to where when you hit them, it makes it feel like you're, it shifts. So I want to pick your brain on the newer pinball.
They still have
machine.
like the real pinball machines, and they make like
right.
now it's like
That's
limited editions.
They're taking these screens and they're trying to make them feel like but you could choose so many different games, and so I'm gonna dig into that. But I mean, I hope everybody enjoyed, kind of going down memory lane. This is not the only 80s video we're gonna do.
I don't know about them. I enjoyed it. I had a good time. So did you have a good time?
Absolutely. And this is our third stream, so we're still new to it. So we had a little bit of a glitch kind of getting started. I think we were running 2 different streams channel, so bear with us. Thanks for everybody who stuck around, and we're gonna dig into as we get more into learning about what all we can show. Probably our next 80 stream, I'm gonna start sharing the screen, and we're gonna kind of get into a little bit more visual content that more matches our videos that we do. So if you guys haven't checked out any of our videos, I have a great producer, and Sterling, my wingman, who's not here tonight. He's gonna be in Nashville this weekend for Icon. And he's not an 80s kid, right? He grew up in the 90s. So, he'll be here with me. We do our videos, and we try to keep them within a certain length of time compared to like a live stream. This is our longest live stream of the 3 we've done so far. But we're gonna be themed around 80s and around Game of Thrones and around some of the sci-fi, science fiction and fantasy streams. So we're gonna keep it to maybe 3 or 4 different types of streams. And we'll get there. I'm not talking about Howard the Duck tonight, Greg. Well, I'll get Howard the Duck next time.
This guy's back with Howard the Duck again. I saw that in the chat earlier.
He's messing with me. Hey, well, I'll talk about Howard the Duck some other time when I talk about George Lucas. No, I hope you guys had a good time. One of the biggest
flops, wasn't it? Like a huge Spielberg flop, like major flop.
I don't know how they. Decided. I think they just gave Lucas some, carte blanche. But I hope everybody had a good time. Remember, tell your friends, hit subscribe. We're going to grow this channel. I'm committed to trying to do the best content we can, and we're going to join some other outlets as well. I think we're going to end up doing something around Spotify, an audio podcast where it's the same content but just audio. So if you're in your car and you don't want to fool around with video, you don't want to see my ugly mug, then if you don't want to watch myself or Sterling, you can listen to us. But anyway, hopefully it was a good time. Dick, I think you've got something coming up, and we'll see when you get that lined up, and we'll
yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm just floating it out there. It's just kind of political, kind of hot button issues, just what's going on in the world, and just like 5 or 6 of my friends, like from all different locations. One of them's in Dublin. There's one of them is Silicon Valley, been working for Adobe for 20 years. Just people, one in Chicago, one in San Antonio, Texas, blue collar worker. And everybody just, there's half the people from the right, half the people from the left. I just want to show everybody that like we're so inundated with the media with these extremists on the right and these extremists on the left that the majority of people in this country are kind of centrist, like center left, center right. They're not like crazy fucking people. So, talking with a bunch of my friends, I realized that, and I just want to like get together and like we'll talk about all these issues and kind of show everybody that's like we're not all that far apart. They make you want to think like you're going to kill your neighbor in the Civil War next year. It's all bullshit. So
yeah, everybody. Hopefully people check out this video. We got the live portion, but then it goes up on YouTube, and people hopefully will see it over the next days and weeks. And if you check it out and you didn't attend the live stream, check out Evil Dick on Twitter at EVELDICK.
Yes, sir.
And that's pretty. You're the most active on Twitter, so
yeah. I got a Blue Sky account. I just opened, so I don't know, more active when more people are over there. I don't do Facebook. I don't like Facebook. I could never understand. To this day, I don't understand why the fuck did people leave MySpace for Facebook? Facebook was like a downgrade. MySpace was
Facebook was better. Walmart.
I never understood it.
He put all the mom and pops out of business.
Listen, I had my top 8 I had my own music playing. I had my own design. I had my blogs up and my videos and like all this different stuff. Is like everything all in one place. And Facebook just sucks a dick. So I don't go there.
Sorry, YouTube. Well, but hey, I appreciate you jumping on with me. Hopefully we had some fun.
It's always good talking to you.
Yeah, and a little trip down memory lane. For those that grew up in the 80s, there was nothing we talked about you didn't remember. And for those that didn't, hopefully you got a little bit of a window into what it was like to, graduate from high school in the early 80s and graduate from high school when the 80s were over. So we covered, I think, both ends of that spectrum, and had a little fun doing it. So I'm going to get out of here. Dick, thank you. And peace out, everybody.